Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again for joining me. A couple of people have been introducing themselves in the chat, so you can continue to do that as you come in. We also had a couple of questions about cameras. You can keep your cameras on. I'm going to record this session as well, just in case anyone does miss it. We're going to be going through a lot of information around the actual process of how we go through and submit our applications for the Worldwide Developers Conference today. So I want to make sure this information is available for all of you, and I'll email it out to you later on as well, so you can use it when you actually go to sit down and do your process, so you know exactly what needs to happen. So I'm going to let these last couple of people into the room, and I'll try and keep an eye on that as well. As usual, please do use the chat as we're moving through the presentation. If there's any questions or if I move through something a little bit too quickly, please do let me know, and then I can make sure that I circle back and answer those questions for you. But this is the second of 3 sessions. Next week, we're going to have office hours, which I'll explain a little bit more about that as we progress through. So for today, we are going to look at that application process, as I promised. We're going to look at how we could develop your ideas further and start to give you a little bit of an idea of things you should focus on, ideas for how you can develop those functionality of your applications, but also strengthen your story. And then I'll give you some next steps of what you should start to focus on before next week and beyond. So it's a pretty jam-packed session. I will get you out a lot earlier than last week, I promise. Sorry, it did run over last week, but there's some really good stories there, so I'm glad you did stick around. So fairly simply, at the moment, we don't know exactly what Apple is going to release in terms of the student challenge. So we're doing this a little bit prematurely in the fact that we don't know exactly what Apple asks of us. We know that there is always a student challenge. The last 4 years have been based around Swift Playgrounds as a prototyping mechanism for building applications and proving your worthiness, I suppose, for gaining a scholarship. However, we don't know the exact idea. So that will come out roughly a month before the Worldwide Developers Conference. So the reason is we're doing this a little bit earlier so that we can prepare you all and you can actually start to work on your projects. And then we're going to just adjust it slightly. So some of the examples that I'm going to give you today are around last year's submission process, and it might change slightly, but chances are, as the trends have been, that it's going to be similar to what we had beforehand. So once you log into the site for submissions, you'll need to have a developer account. So I did mention that you need to have an Apple developer account. They are free. You don't need to have the paid version, which allows you to push your applications to the App Store. Just a free developer account is fine, and that's what you're going to use in order to put your submission in, but it's also how you're going to receive your invite for the event. Whenever you go to any Apple events, they always use your Apple wallet, so it'll be attached to your Apple ID as well. But it is worthwhile to make sure that you have that up and running. Even if you're not successful for the scholarship, it's a fantastic way to follow the conference and access all the resources. So when you first log in, and this is screenshots from the 2022, as I mentioned before, there'll be some particulars about your age, your gender, ethnicity, etc. Please make sure you do enter all of these accurately. Don't try and manipulate the system by putting anything that's untrue. For example, if you're 18 verse 17, please make sure that you do. There is some legal implications for that, and you need to be honest as possible. Also, if you are underage, they will allow you to have a chaperone as well to attend the event, which is a pretty big deal, especially if you're kind enough to take your teacher, who would also really love to visit the Worldwide Developers Conference as well. But please make sure you do fill this in. Please make sure you are accurate with the information, and this will all start to develop your profile for Apple as well. So in the future, if you do happen to have an internship with Apple or employment or anything like that, it's all going to be attached to your developer account, which is attached to your Apple ID. And hopefully in your schools, you've learned about your digital footprint and making sure that it is a positive one for your future employment opportunities. And you don't want to shoot yourself in your foot just because you were immature at some point or perhaps made a mistake. So please make sure you fill in those details. That's the first step. From there, we need to make sure that we upload our project. An easy way to get disqualified from this process is to not follow the guidelines. For example, it says you need a 25 megabyte zip file that you upload. If your application is 26 megabytes, it may perhaps work and upload into the system, but it could be an easy way that you're going to get disqualified. So you need to make sure that you answer everything to the best of your ability and you follow all of the requirements that are needed. So this includes making sure that you have a Swift Playground project that is under 25 megabytes. Another note on that, and we're going to go into this a little bit more as we progress through this process. We need to make sure, I'm just going to let one more person into the room. We do need to make sure that we need to make sure that as we are uploading our project and we make sure that the technical requirements of our app project meet the standards. And one of those is that it cannot connect to the internet. So as you're developing your application, if you are pulling from an API or anything that requires the internet, you need to make sure that we don't have that functionality inside your application. So there's a little bit of an issue, especially if some of you are interested in doing something with perhaps with ChatGPT or some other sort of AI with an API call. You need to make sure that it does not contact the internet. So it needs to be self-contained so that the people can access it. And there's some security reasons for this. People are going to be downloading your application. They could potentially have some harmful information on it. They don't want anything contacting with web servers, etc. Okay, so that part's fairly simple. And then we're just following through the details of what software you use to develop it. This just allows the person who's marking or assessing your application to ensure that they have the correct software so that it runs the best, it basically runs the same way that it runs on your machine. The next part is your story, where you start to look at basically the passion that you put into your project, your story. And this is what we're going to focus a lot on today is how you can develop something that's meaningful, something that has some impact, and something that's also personal to yourselves. If you happen to have some apps which are in the App Store, this is optional, but it will support your application. Now, apps doesn't mean that you need to have something which has 1 million downloads or has made you $1 million. It just means that you've gone through that process. It shows that you are a developer. It shows that you're interested in the infrastructure and in the ecosystem that Apple offers. So developing something small, something unique, something personal could also help develop your project. And this could be perhaps, my students do mobile games development, they do mobile apps development, they create their own personal projects. It could be moving that one step further, asking your parents to upgrade your developer account and allowing you to push that to the App Store. I've seen some successful applications who have just created like a color picker or an organizer or a study timer. Last week we heard from Jai Chen, who was talking a lot about how he'd have all these little ideas, and rather than like me just keeping it in my notes section, he just starts to build them. He builds them, he publishes them. Some of them are successful, some of them are not. So having these little applications inside the App Store will also help develop your resume, as it will, or your profile as we start to develop. With these word counts, it says you can have up to 350 words. I know my students, when I give them assignments and I say the word limit is 300 words, they will write almost exactly up to 300 words, sometimes over to 301 words. Write meaningful, concise paragraphs of text. You don't need to go exactly up to the word limit. Like many teachers, when we're marking things like this, nobody wants to read people just babbling or repeating the question, as some of you have been trained as you go through education. Please make sure that what you put in there is meaningful so that it really highlights your skills and highlights your ability to develop. Finally, as we mentioned last week, there's some swag that you will get when you're successful. Sometimes we've seen in different situations where Some applications weren't successful, but they still received some swag as well. So there is a size preference there as well for receiving jackets and shirts and all sort of fun things. So please make sure you're doing that. The last section, which is optional, which I would say is mandatory. This is where you get a chance to tell your story. How does the application that you created personally connect to you? You know, if you were from an immigrant family, perhaps you're a poor teacher's kid who's stuck in an international school, you need to tell your story. It needs to be unique to you. It needs to be personal, and trying to marry in those aspects. This is good training for when you start to do college applications, or you start to do portfolio entry to different colleges. We start to reflect on your own journey. When did you start coding? Who was that awesome teacher who hosted a webinar for you to help you, inspire you to get into development? Those are the things that Apple cares about. You've got to remember that Apple is still a consumer electronics company. They care about stories and they care about marketing. I know we're in the education sense, and we like to think that the money's a little bit dirty. However, this is something which is a marketing opportunity for Apple, and it's also a marketing opportunity for you. The reason that I know about Yuma and Jai Chen and Dalton is through the marketing that went on and through their stories. And that's how I connected with them, and it's how I heard about them. So whilst this comment section is optional, I would say for you all, please make sure that you fill this in. Please make sure you spend the time to develop your story about becoming a developer. I can see a question in the channel here about how do we sign up. Eventually, there will be a website released. I will email it all to you as soon as I hear the announcement. And from there, you just click on it and you sign in with your developer account, with your Apple ID. So please make sure you do sign up for that beforehand. I will have a slide at the end of this presentation with a little QR code on the bottom right where you can go to sign up. But essentially, it's just through developer.apple.com. You just sign in with your Apple ID, you accept the user agreement, and then you can sign up. If you don't have an Apple ID, you can get your parents to sign you up for an Apple ID, and that will allow you to register for this. You could also register with your parents' Apple ID as well, and then put in your details. That would also work as well if your parents don't want you to have one. School Apple IDs will also work. You just need to add on that extra bit of having a development. Josiah's just asked, how long do we typically have after the student challenge is announced before the apps are due? Typically, it's a short window, like 4 to 3 weeks maybe, which is why we're trying to do this early. So typically, the Worldwide Developers Conference is in June. Last year, it was around the 15th of June from memory. And then on the 3rd of May, we had an announcement about the student project. So it's a very short window, but you can do a lot of background work beforehand. And we had another question about ages. Just put it to the best of your knowledge, the closest date. If you're 12 or 13, just put 13 if you're going to be 13 by the time that you attend the conference. That's the most important bit. It's more to do with legalities of privacy and information if you're under the age of 13. Similar to using social networks or things like that, you need to make sure that you're of age to participate. And the lowest age is currently 13. So if you're 12 currently, but you'll be turning 13 when you actually attend the event, that's perfectly fine. Please make sure that you do register as well. So what are the prerequisites? Well, you need to make sure that you are 13 years old. You need to have that free developer account. You need to be enrolled in a school or a university. So we've got a lot of students here. If you know that one of your computer science teachers is currently enrolled in university, you should also push them to be publishing their own projects for the student projects as well. Teachers do qualify provided that they are also enrolled in a full-time education as well. So please make sure you bug your teachers, make sure that they walk the walk the same as you all, and they develop their own projects. And hopefully theirs will be around education or something like that. Our applications must be in English. Of course, the developer conference is in English. It is all presented in English. There's no other options. There are subtitles for the videos, but is all presented in English, and so the application process is also in English. For your projects, again, your projects must be in English. There could be something that's a language-based application, if that's something that's personal to you. For example, if you have a native language that perhaps is dying out due to lack of education, that could be a really cool personal project where you could teach someone in English instruction how to teach your language. I can't think of a language like that off the top of my head. Perhaps some indigenous languages from Australia, which aren't as popular or don't have formal lesson materials. That could be very interesting, and it could be something that you could do. But the majority of your project needs to be in English, so for the instructions, etc. From there, I mentioned before that we need to compress our project up to 25 megabytes. We need to use a Swift Playgrounds app. That was a requirement from last year. I'm assuming it's going to continue because I can continue to see updates from Apple in this app package. So that will continue. And the minimum requirement last year was Swift Playgrounds 4.0.2, but I'm sure the latest version is what they'll be expecting. In order to submit, again, you'll need to have your developer account. You'll need to have an uploaded proof of enrollment to your school. So your teacher could provide a letterhead, or you could just have a screenshot from your learning management system showing your course load or something like that. Will be perfectly fine as well. Perhaps you have a report, that could be fine. You upload your project description, and of course that optional part, which I've told you all is mandatory. We need to make sure we tell our stories. Stories are very important. Stories are what connect people to your project, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. I can see a question there. Someone has asked, are we able to join if we are 12 years old? Currently, the minimum requirements are that you are 13. However, I think this is still useful for you because I'm sure you will be 13 within the next however many months. So you could have a go at doing it. You may get restricted because of your age, but at least you're developing a profile and they can see growth on you as well. So whilst you may get disqualified because of your age, I think it's still some useful learning for you in sticking around and understanding the process, because you're going to be more prepared for next year. So one thing you heard reflected in the presentations last year was about what would make this good story, what would make some sort of impact. And the main thing is making it personal to yourself. So Dalton mentioned we could have social justice issues. You know, these are hot topics and things that really matter to humanity. Disability and accessibility. Accessibility is something which Apple prides itself on. It's something which is built into the ecosystem, it's built into the operating systems, and is certainly available within the language. So focusing on something for a disability or accessibility is something that could become a part of your focus. We could also have environmental and sustainability, mental health and wellness. This is a big hot topic, especially after COVID. We, of course, could have financial literacy. It's a big barrier for education and allowing people to progress, especially out of poverty, ensuring that people have some sort of financial literacy. Healthcare accessibility and affordability, having some sort of information, and we know that AI is helping with this as well. Some sort of community service or outreach program. And lastly, we could have something included with diversity. So these are a couple of ideas of things that you could use to develop and create a focus of an idea. So I'm going to leave this up for a moment and just reflect on something which you might be passionate about, your family might be passionate about, or perhaps there's something that you already work in your schools. I know at Hong Kong International School, we have a big focus on service and community outreach. We have a lot of clubs. And we have a lot of students involved in this kind of work. So it wouldn't be too much of a stretch for us to think about, well, what do we need to do and what do we need to push? I've also seen there's a couple of people here from some Christian schools. And I know that myself, I used to work in Catholic education in Western Australia. And service was a requirement of graduation. Every student needed to do a certain number of community service hours in order to be able to qualify. So I think that's important for you all as well, to make sure that you really tie it into something you're already doing. If your teachers have projects for you that you've been working on, there's no reason you can't double dip a little bit, and that you submit your work for your class, but also include this in your WWDC project. Again, at our school, we have senior projects where students need to create a personal project in order for graduation. My seniors who are in the room here with us, there's no reason you couldn't make this a part of your senior project. And actually the deadlines marry up quite well. And you see that on the bottom right there, a lot of these are focused around the United Nations Sustainability Goals. So if you need a little bit more inspiration on different topics that you could focus on, the United Nations Sustainability Goals are a good way to focus and think about what impacts humanity and what are some of the issues which need to be solved. So once we have our problem identified, so perhaps we're looking at environmental sustainability, we need to be a little bit more specific with environmental sustainability because it's such a large topic. And even if you were to say, perhaps, I don't know, climate change or something like that, we need to focus even more. One of my students, I don't know if she's in the room at the moment, but created a little application to identify the different types of plastics so that when someone went to a bin and they had perhaps had a Coke bottle, they could say, okay, well, what type of plastic is this? Which bin does it go on? In Hong Kong, it's a bit different. We don't have as segregated amount of recycling, but I know in Australia, we do. We have certain things that can go into recycling, certain things cannot. It's not just a matter of, is this plastic or is it metal? So that could be something where you could really narrow your focus. But as we're thinking about these problems, when we go through Stanford's design thinking process, this is one process you could follow. We do our empathy mapping. We think about what do we hear, what do we see, what do we feel, and what do we think, where you can really start to become this personal process. You can start to think about how does this reflect on you personally, and what do you hear, what do you see, what do you feel, and what do you think? And this is a way that we can start to then define our problem. After we have defined our problem and we know what the issue is that we want to solve, we can start to ideate around our problems. We have our core idea, and perhaps this is a recycling app, identifying trash, identifying different types of plastic. Perhaps it could be looking at moles on your skin and identifying, are they malignant or are they benign? That could be something which is your core idea, but there could be some outside things around that. Perhaps we want to monitor our moles across time or monitor our skin across time. Perhaps we want to develop this further to have medical advice. Perhaps we want to find locations for medical centers where people can get skin checks. That could be our outer ideas. We have our core focus and the things that we want to do, and then we can develop this idea further and start to ideate. Once we have done that, then we can start to prototype. We can start to run this through the design process. I hope you're all familiar with the design process. I've got a slide next, which I'm going to run through it for you. But basically, it's a cyclical process where we want to identify and run through and test our prototype to ensure that we meet our core idea, that we ensure that the functionality is working, and then we can test it on our intended users to make sure that it does work as intended. So, for example, if I was to test an app which was testing our moles or looking at our moles or monitoring skin cancer growth, I would pick someone who has some moles. I wouldn't test it on a user which isn't my target market. So hopefully you're all familiar with the design process. The design process is very important. I know your teachers reflect on this, particularly those, I've got a lot of people here from Rockhampton. I know that the design process is built into your digital technologies curriculum because I used to teach it. You need to live and breathe this. This is the part of developing anything, any project, whether you run through this process formally or informally. It's a good process to work through. As teachers, we tend to push you through this formally. We make sure that you do brainstorm and you do perhaps you do a graphical organizer and you start to write things down, and then you'll submit that, and then we'll get some feedback, and then you'll plan it and you'll prototype and you'll evaluate. But this isn't a linear process. You don't just evaluate it once and then stop. you need to make sure that you then brainstorm what new functionality could be included. When you gave it to your ideal user, what did they say? And it's not saying that you need to take on every feedback. You might give it to your friend who perhaps is your target audience, but they may give you some advice that's not going to work, or you can't fit it within your time frame. And it's okay to dismiss some feedback, or to say, okay, well, if I was actually going to produce this and create it into an app, well, maybe I would do that in the future. Maybe that will be version 2, 3, 6, 10. Okay, perhaps you need to critically evaluate what that feedback is, and you can dismiss that or choose it. But there should be some things which perhaps the user said, look, that button's a little bit small for my finger, or your interface is way too crowded, we need to simplify it, or your colors don't work. I'm colorblind, so that's something that I always pick up on. And some of my students who are very programming focused hate how much that I pick on them for their design. But the design can be something that makes something look professional, or it makes it look like you know, an amateur has created. So do spend some time on your design, do spend some time on your interface, and please make sure that you do test your application thoroughly before it gets submitted, because that's another way which you can very quickly be disqualified from the process. If the judges download your application and it simply doesn't run, or it doesn't work as intended, or is difficult to use, it's going to get dismissed very quickly. So keep things simple. Make sure that your interface is easy to use, and make sure that it does look professional. Use professional colors. Don't go too crazy or too obscure. On that note, it's also worth mentioning to consider your copyright. If you're going to use an icon, if you're going to use any imagery, if you're going to use any music, please make sure that it is copyright free. There's plenty of copyright free audio, music, graphics. If in doubt, create your own, okay? You're all very talented people. You also have friends who are very talented. So if you need to create something custom, please make sure you do, to make sure that you don't get disqualified simply on copyright. So I'm gonna have a little break from rabbiting on for a little bit. I'm gonna give you all a little bit of a chance to run through this empathy mapping process. So hopefully now you've had a little bit of a think. Scan the QR code on the bottom right. I'm also going to post it into the chat as well. I'm just going to grab it now for you. Copy that, and I'll paste it into the chat to everyone. So there's a link to the activity. It's just a Padlet. We do have a little bit of content in there already, but we're going to run through and think about your ideas. Someone could have the same idea for you. Like, for example, you know, there's the Uber and there's the Lyft. It's good to have healthy competition. It doesn't mean that your project is going to be any less valuable if you post your idea to this. It's all about the execution. It's all about your personal connection. It's all about your story as well. So don't feel afraid to share your ideas. We can all develop. Perhaps there's an idea that you can create as well. But we're going to give you about 3 minutes to work through this exercise. So I'll start to invite you all back to the Zoom. This Padlet will remain active, so if you can see some ideas in there, or you feel like it's going to, you think of something later on as we're going along, keep a copy of that URL, save it to your bookmark, so when you go back to your project, you have a little bit of inspiration there for you. But that's available for you, and I'll keep that there for you. As I'm introducing projects, I like to share some of the work from Simon Sinek. Now, this guy was on Apple's speaking circuit for a while, but he also talked to companies like Google and Microsoft. And I'm going to share a little short video about his thinking around developing meaning for products. So hopefully this audio works. Please let me know in the chat if there's any issues. I'm just going to play this very short video. The quality of the video doesn't matter too much. Just kind of listen to his words. The gist of it is that we need to make sure that we center our products around the why. All of the companies know what they do. For example, I have an app which skin moles. Well, that's fantastic. How do I do it? Well, I have a little camera and I scan it, and then it tells me, okay, that looks like it's benign, or it looks like it's safe. Or it looks like it's cancerous. But the big thing is why? Why do we have this application? Why is it important? And that gets back to that personal reasoning. Perhaps this application could save lives. That's a big why. Perhaps it could be a bigger reason. Perhaps you live in the Philippines where there's not access to healthcare or skin scanning clinics. So there needs to be a bigger reason of why. Why are you doing what you're doing? Why is it important that we have this application? Was it just a bit of fun? Or are we trying to actually change something? Are we trying to make an impact? And that's where this impact, and this is where your stories start to come in. So making sure that we have that consistency of what, we have our discipline of why, but also, our discipline of how, but we also have that clarity of why, making sure that your message is front and foremost. And this starts with your branding, making sure that if you have a logo, or if you make sure that you have some sort of concept that you've developed, that there's some reasoning behind that. I'm just reading a question here. Based on something mentioned earlier, if I have a concept for an app that is based on a game, if this game has fan content policy, which says I'm allowed, am I capable of making it? Yeah, as long as there's no issue with copyright. We just mentioned copyright for those of you who came in a little bit late. If there's no issue with copyright, you have permission to use it, there is no issue with that as well. But getting back to the why, entertainment is a why. For example, when we're all in lockdown, we all needed entertainment. You could add something a little bit more. So for example, if you had a game, you could integrate fitness and well-being. We all know that there is an obesity epidemic around the world. So that could be something, or it could be something to do with mental health. So it could be a game which could help with mental health. So whilst you may be developing a game, you really need to pull into that why as well. But games are fantastic. I would encourage you to develop games. You saw that little game that Yuma created as well that used augmented reality. So things can be fun. Yes, people do get accepted who have not gone through this process that I am explaining. But what I'm trying to do is to give you the biggest chance and to help raise your profile as a developer. Another protocol that I use for my students when they're developing ideas is the Scamper method. So this is very simple. It's just an acronym. So substitute, combine, adapt, modify, purpose, eliminate, and also reverse. So what functionality could be substituted? What functionality do you have if you learnt that you could combine? How can features be adapted to suit a purpose? How can color, shape, form be modified? What else could be used for other than its original purpose? What can be eliminated, and how can the design, pattern, layout, or order be reversed? So I'm going to give you a little example of this. So for example, if I had a little app, perhaps it was a task app or something which produced different ideas or story prompts or something like that. Well, what else could it be used for? Well, I could substitute in, so rather than having text-based input, I could also have speech-based. You know, I could use Siri Kit, which is fairly easy to use, which allows people to dictate rather than type in. Okay, that allows different types of input, allows people to be a little bit quicker. So what functionality could be substituted? I don't need to type. I could use verbal input. What could be combined? Well, I don't need to just have typing, right? I could have dictation as well as typing. So I could combine the two. It's not a if this, not that. It could be both. What could be adapted? How could features be adapted to suit the purpose? Well, I could pull some data from my calendar, which could populate the tasks. So perhaps we don't need to have input at all. Perhaps it could be some sort of artificial intelligence assistant, which allows me to pull information from my existing data on my device. How could color, shape, and form be modified? Well, I don't have a navigation view at the moment. Perhaps I want to have a tab view. Perhaps I want to have additional pages. I want to develop a profile for my user. Perhaps I want to have settings so I can change it to night mode or change the scheme or something like that. So I could modify the shape, the form, the color. What is the purpose? Well, the purpose could change completely. As I mentioned before, this could be story prompts. We could do like a magic 8-ball. It could be a study timetable. It could be setting your homework for the day, or a timer for your study to make sure that you stay focused. Then what could be eliminated? I pull data from calendar to populate tasks. Perhaps we don't need to have that. Perhaps we do. Perhaps we need to not have it in a list at all. Perhaps it could be a word cloud. There's many different options for this. And last of all, how could we reverse? Well, perhaps it could just be a chatbot. Perhaps it's not exactly as is intended. So this is just a way to start getting you to think. And it's a good exercise if you're working within a group or you have a cohort within your class who are all going for WWDC as a part of your projects. But this is a good process that you can run through with your classmates as a part of that evaluation within your design process. And that's the point that I normally use at. When we get to evaluation, sometimes we need a protocol to follow or a structure to follow. And the Scamper process, I think, fits that well as we run through and evaluate it. Next, I want to move on to how can we create the app package. Now, this is fairly simple within Swift Playgrounds. If you're using Swift Playgrounds, I'm going to open up Swift Playgrounds here. On the bottom left, click on App. This is going to create the app package. The app package, which is used for Swift Playgrounds and for the application process, was born out of Swift Playgrounds when we had the ability to create apps. So that's all you need to do. Create a new project and create it there. It's saved to your iCloud folder inside Swift Playgrounds. You just zip that up and you can send it on. So that's fairly simple for you. So this is going to show you then how to go to your files, go to your Playgrounds inside your iCloud drive. There's my WWDC project. Oh, let's go back to it. I can hard press on it or right click on it, compress it, and then I have that, and I can see the size of it as well that's under the requirement. So fairly simple. Again, I've got a video for this on my YouTube channel. The link is on the bottom right. I will put that into the chat as well, just so you have it all for you. There's a link to the YouTube. That will just show you that exact same process again, but is available for you. It's a little bit more complicated within Xcode. However, again, it's fairly simple once you get moving. Let me try that again. Don't know why that's not moving. Sorry. So as I create a new project, file new, if I click on iOS at the very top of that screen, at the top there, next to multi-platform, I'll have the option for creating a Swift Playgrounds app. This will create the exact same application prototype that was created previously in the other video. You could also create it with your iPad, go to your iCloud file and open that same file in the Xcode. So if you need to test it with your teacher or with a friend who perhaps doesn't have an iPad, you can airdrop that file to them or share it to them through an iCloud sharing link, and that will allow them to access that file as well. So you just go to File, New Project, select iOS, and you'll see that Swift Playgrounds app available for you. So there was a short video that came out when the iPad Pro was released, and specifically with the new processor. But what's fantastic about the iPad in general is the amount of sensors that we have available. And I suppose that's why Apple is trying to get us to prototype with this unique device. Yes, we can use Xcode, but when we develop something on our Mac, it means that we also need to test it on another device. Inside our iPads and inside our phones, we have so many sensors that allow us to be creative in what we can do. For example, compasses and magnetic connectors and microphones and LiDAR sensors. So there's so many different things that we can develop if we start to get a little bit creative with what we're trying to do. So for example, if you're into orienteering or you're into the outdoors, perhaps you're going to create an app which utilizes the compass. And all those different presenters that you saw in that video, you know, the creators of Procreate, the creators of an app, sorry, I can't remember the name of the app, but the app where it can identify if the tennis ball is in or out. If you're a tennis fanatic, those are the kind of things that you think of. And I often say to my students when they want to go into a computer science degree, computer science is a fantastic degree when you have additional context. So for example, if you did computer science as an undergraduate degree, that's fantastic. But if you could combine that with finance or economics or a medical degree or a sports science degree, you then have some context and knowledge which allows you to apply it to unique situations. And that's really what we're looking for here. What can we do with these awesome devices and with this ecosystem that'll really help people, really make an impact? So you need to think about the different sensors that you have within your devices. So what technologies are available? Well, first of all, we have the basic things, right? We spoke about these before. We have the camera, we have the microphone, so we can do dictation. Of course, there's touchscreen and gestures, which are very useful. But we also have the keyboard. Then we have the connectivity. Now, remember what I said about connecting to the internet. Yes, we have Wi-Fi connectivity. However, remember that the judges or the people who are assessing your application may only have one device. So you can't make it difficult for them to test it. So be careful if you're trying to pair two devices together. If you're trying to use things like Wi-Fi to connect, generally it's a no-go if it's connecting to the internet. But we can really start to get innovative as well. So we have machine learning. Dalton spoke about this a lot last week. We have these motion sensors, which I showed you on that last slide. And we have these cool technologies like augmented reality. And then we've also got these accessibility features like voiceover, text size, using Siri instructions and things like that. So these are the things you need to start to move your project from, a cool app to really awesome and something that will make a really, really interesting application and make some impact. As we're moving through to your next steps, and we don't have too much longer to go in this presentation, we had our introduction last week. This week, we're doing this little piece of brainstorming. Next week, we have office hours. This is where you can start to come with your ideas. Now, if you don't have an idea, you're welcome to come and audit and have a listen and listen to other people's ideas. But ideally, what I'd like to do is to work through with each of you one-on-one. I'll get you to share your screen, share your ideas. Perhaps it's a piece of paper. Perhaps you're just going to verbally explain, but I want to try and give each of you an opportunity to explain what your idea is and get some feedback. And the feedback will be from me. I'm going to try and get back some of our guest speakers as well. And we'll also have a couple of other teachers who can give some feedback on your projects based on the information that we've given you. So next week, I'd like you to come with an idea. I just had a question. Can you email me? Yes, you can certainly email me. You can email me before, you can email me after. That's perfectly fine. I can help you out. And of course, you do have the social media details from our previous presenters. So you can also reach out to them. Obviously, don't make your idea public on a public forum, but you can direct message them for that as well. But next week is optional. If you feel like you've got enough information now and you really need to sit down for a month, gather your thoughts, start to prototype, that's perfectly fine. Last year, we submitted around the 24th of May, just before the Worldwide Developers Conference, which was in June. So around the 24th of May. So we had those 3 weeks. So we've got a little bit more time now to develop these projects. But if you feel like you're unable to have something coherent to share next week, feel free to come along. But if you feel like you have enough information, that's fine also. We just had a question. What is the exact date? We do not have the exact date. It is up to the Apple gods of when they're going to release the date. However, we'll find out. As soon as we find out, we'll let you know. But just prepare all the same. The preparation will help you for when you are 13 or when you are ready. But just keep working towards this target, and then we'll work towards that. Last of all, I mentioned a couple of times, you need to have your developer account. So download the developer app. Make sure you get logged into the forums. Go to developer.apple.com. Sign up so you're ready to go as soon as the application comes. I did mention at the beginning, I know some of you have come in late. I have recorded this presentation. I will release it and email it to you. But as soon as the WWDC announcement comes out, I will make sure that I email it to everyone on my calendar invite so that you all have access to that information as well. If you are signed up for a developer account, which I hope you all are, you'll also receive a notification from Apple as well. So that'll come through for you. And last of all, please make sure you give me some feedback, I've got a little QR code. I'm going to post this in the forum as well. If there's any information you'd like to know for next week, or you feel like you need more clarification on, I'll be glad to include it in the presentation next week. I've just put a little feedback form in there, a little Google form. So you can please fill that out, and I will get back to you on your feedback. But apart from that, that is all the information that we have for you. I can see one question there about trying to install Swift on a Windows device. You are going to struggle to develop Swift applications on a Windows device. There's going to be a little bit of fiddling around. Swift is open source. You can develop in different applications like algorithms and things like that. So for example, Microsoft Visual Code does allow you to install an extension for Swift. Linux also would probably be a better option for you, Jared, if you're trying to develop Windows. Perhaps you can install a virtual machine with Linux because there is server-side coding and things like that on Linux. However, I would try, if you're not sure what Linux is an alternative operating system, Windows, Linux, and also Mac OS are the sort of three main operating systems. Linux is an open source operating system. So there are some options for that. Because Windows was developed with the .NET language and Swift is developed on the Swift language, you're going to struggle to develop on that. There is currently no web-based ones that I've seen that will allow you to create the package that you need to for this. So I'll try and find a device or borrow a device. You can do a lot of your planning beforehand. However, it'd be very tough for you to develop on a Windows device. I did mention that some people have in the past got scholarships developing things other than Swift. So it is possible that you could develop, I don't know about your programming ability, but something in C++ that will contribute to the impact, which will allow you to get into WWDC, but that's going to be pretty tough. I would try and focus or borrow something for a month. Perhaps your school has some devices as well. Sammy has just jumped in and said, if you're going to use Linux on Windows, Windows subsystem for Linux works pretty well. So there you go. So that could be a good option for you. I'm happy to stick around for a couple more questions as well, but we are 3 minutes to 6. As promised, I did get you out of here on time. I know you've all had a pretty busy day at school, apart from my students, because they all had parent-teacher conferences. So I'm sure most of them didn't get out of bed today. However, I'm happy to answer any questions individually or as a group. But for now, thanks very much. I look forward to seeing you all next week. Thanks again for attending. I know it is your evening, and you can now relax. Thanks very much. Have a good evening, and I'll see you all next week.